So today I want to talk about what I think is one of the most misquoted verses from the Bible. Money is the root of all evil. It's in movies, it's in songs, it's in everyday conversations. But here's the thing. That is not what Paul said. In First Timothy, Paul actually wrote, "The love of money is the root of all kinds of evil." That one missing phrase, the love of, changes everything. Hi, I'm Sarah Scott, and welcome to Unforeseen Journey, where each week we take a piece of scripture, challenge what we thought we knew about it, and discover one way to live it out in our everyday lives. So every time I hear a sermon on this particular passage, it always turns into this idea that money is the root of all evil, therefore we shouldn't want it, shouldn't have it. We need to play it small, sell off everything, live a simple life, and don't want too much. But I had to ask the question, is this really what Paul is saying? Or was there something bigger here? So here's the question that I think we wrestle with a lot as people of faith. Does being a person of faith mean we're supposed to play it small and safe? Or can we also have big, bold, ambitious, even empire building lives and still be grounded in faith? So let's do a little bit of backdrop here on the scripture because I think it's so important for us to understand the perspective of where or when these stories were being written because it changes our perspective on it, right? These weren't all sermons that were meant to be or were originally intended to be said in front of a large group of people. In this particular instance where this was a letter from Paul to Timothy, this is really a letter from a mentor to a mentee, right? So this is really not meant for the world to hear. This was meant for somebody's basically boss telling their employee, here's some guidelines that you need to be thinking about. But this wasn't meant to be told to everybody. And I think that that also gives us a little bit of a different perspective when we look at what was the meaning behind it. What was the real message? So when we look at the circumstances under which Paul was writing to Timothy, Paul was off doing whatever Paul was off doing. And Timothy is now this young leader in Ephesus. And this is a city that is dripping in wealth and status and flash. And if we were to like bullet together, let's think Wall Street meets Las Vegas, but with temples. Okay. Now that you've got that vision in your head, there's lots of wealthy people that are sitting in this church, right? This is like one of the churches I know up here we would love to see where there's all the really rich people are sitting there and they're sitting around his church and he's a really young leader. These people have money and power and status and they're trying to use it to throw their weight around. So Paul's warning isn't exactly money is evil. It was don't confuse wealth with worth. Don't let money own you. See the difference? Maybe not. So why do we constantly push, preach, play it small? Why does this scripture always become in a church, play it small? Why do we treat ambition like it's a sin? Contentment doesn't mean you stop dreaming. It means your dreams just don't control you. There's a different focus at the end of it. Because what if building something big, a business, a movement, even an empire, could actually be holy if it lifts up other people? A while back, there was a story about a CEO, Dan Price. He was the CEO of Gravity Payments in Seattle. If you have not looked him up, look him up. And a few years back, he shocked everybody in the world. He came out and he cut his $1 million salary and raised the minimum wage for everybody in his company to $70,000 for every single employee. Everybody came after him. They said it was going to bomb the business. Everything was going to go bad. And instead, what ended up happening was the business grew. His employees were more dedicated. They were able to breathe and enjoy their work because they weren't just worried about the day-to-day paychecks of everything. And this is what it looks like when somebody uses their ambition and resources, not just to build it for themselves, but reaches out and uses that influence to raise up others as part of it. Now, if you've never heard of Dan Price, I'm sure you've heard of my next example, Let's think about Scrooge. Yes, I am talking about Ebenezer Scrooge and The Christmas Carol. So this one's probably pretty popular with everybody. And we know that, Scrooge was very, very wealthy, but he hoarded all of his wealth to himself. And it made him a very lonely man, right? He was very lonely to the point where three spirits were sent to him by his best friend in order to try to convince him to change his mind. But if we get to the end of the story, at the end of the Christmas Carol, Scrooge doesn't sell everything and live in rags. We don't see him selling off the townhouse, giving away his wealth, doing all of this stuff. He is still a very wealthy man. He still has his counting house. He still has his mansion. The difference is it changed his heart, and he used his wealth to create joy and to love on people. That is what we end up celebrating. And that is what Paul is telling Timothy. Command the rich to be generous and willing to share. So we have to go a little bit deeper into that scripture to see what Paul is really telling Timothy, which is not that money itself is evil. It's the intent behind what we are doing. Are we hoarding it and are we trying to use it to push our own agendas? Or are we being generous with it and using it to lift up others and using it to create a better world? The villain isn't money. The villain in this story is our closed hearts. So here is my challenge for this week. I want you to open your hand just once. Now, I'm not saying you have to choose money as your resource. Pick a resource that you have. It could be money, it could be time, it can be influence, it can be space. Use it in a way that you normally wouldn't. Pay for someone's meal. Mentor someone who can't pay you to do it. Introduce your friend to a new opportunity. Okay? One act of generosity with a resource that you are more than abundant in. Don't confuse playing small with being holy. And don't confuse wealth with worth. The size of your empire isn't what matters here. It's the size of your open heart. That's the life Paul was pointing Timothy towards. That was the kind of leadership that Paul wanted Timothy to uphold. Not a life shrunk by fear, but a life expanded by love. That's the life that is truly a well-lived life. Thanks for listening in. And remember, your faith was never meant to be contained. We'll talk to you next week. Bye.